Hi, Maddie. Thank you for having me on your show.
Hey, thank you for joining us. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about who you are and what you're writing.
Okay, so my name is Val. I am the author of the Aoife Walsh Thirller series. There are 5 books in the series. They're all set in Ireland because I'm Irish, and that's what I know. And originally, I didn't start off being, I'm kind of late to writing. I used to work in an office and I was made redundant from there, and I ended up with a lot of time on my hands. So I thought I'd try writing, and I wrote my first book, and then it just kind of went on to my second, third, fourth, and fifth. So now I'm in the middle of trying to write my 6th.
I love it. So I have to ask, were you an avid reader before you started writing?
Oh, yeah. My mother taught us all to read when we were 3. I have no memory of life before books.
Pick your reader's brain because like you, I too have always been an avid reader. What were some of your favorite genres that you would read?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, because I started reading when I was 3, I've read almost everything except horror. I never took to horror, but I read, like when I was in my teens, I read romance and only romance. And then I went on to reading different things. I read autobiographies. I read a little bit of science fiction. I read the classics at one stage when I couldn't think of anything better to read. I read chick lit. I mean, if you can think of it, if it isn't horror, I'd say I've read it at some stage. But eventually I got to the stage where I was just bored with all those books. Like they all seemed to be more or less the same. And then I started reading thrillers, and I've really stuck to thrillers mostly since then. I wander off onto other genres occasionally, but thrillers are my go-to genre.
Oh, yes. And that brings us to another question because you've got a bunch of great thrillers out here. Was there something that inspired you to jump into writing in that category?
Thrillers? Well, actually, when I first started trying to write, I started trying to write a kid's book because I thought it would be easier. And then halfway through, it wasn't actually, but then halfway through, I thought to myself, no, why am I doing this? I read thrillers. I want to write a thriller. So I started writing a thriller. So I'd always worked in an office. I started writing about a young woman who worked in an office. So my character is called Aoife, and Aoife is a very common Irish name. So Aoife is working in an office. It's her second day. She's working as a temp. And her second day in the office, she arrives first in the office to find her boss hanging from the ceiling. So then she goes off and she has her child because she's heavily pregnant at the time. She goes off and has her child. And when she comes back, the police have already decided that it was murder. And Aoife always wanted to be a freelance journalist. But that's very hard to do in Ireland, and she'd given up on it. But now that she has a baby, she wants a job where she can have more control of her own schedule. So she decides this is her chance because she found the body. She's working with people who've known the murder victim for years. So she's going to write this and she's going to become famous and all the rest. But of course, as soon as she starts digging into it, people discover what she's doing and their attempts at her life and so on.
Wow. So as a new mom, she's trying to solve this mystery. That's a lot on her plate.
Oh, she has more than that on her plate because when she's just had a baby, she thinks that she's very happily married. And she's been married for a few years now, and she thinks she's really happily married. And then she discovers that when people are trying to kill her, her husband doesn't seem to care. So she begins to wonder, like, what's going on there?
Oh, I'm not gonna ask for any spoilers, but that's like a whole storyline on its own. Man.
Well, you see, that's what makes it a series, because all of my books, there is a murder that's solved at the end of the book, and then all the characters from that book disappear, and the only characters that are carried over into each book are Aoife and her family. So it starts off with her relationship with her husband, and the relationship with her family members carries on throughout all the books.
Wow. That is intense. And the most recent one you've dropped is Dying to Tell, right?
Dying to Tell, that's right.
Oh, tell me a little more about that. Where is she at in?
There it is. Okay, so Dying to Tell is kind of a bit of a giveaway because it's the 5th book in the series. So she is now no longer married to this husband who was causing her problems. And she's planning to get married to somebody else. So what's happening is she's been trying for 4 books to get into journalism, and she's finally gets a story. She's actually asked to write a series of stories about missing people for one of the big papers in Ireland. Okay, so she's all excited about this, and then she also has a wedding that she's trying to not so much plan, but the other people are planning for her. So she chooses as her subject a guy called Matt. So what happened to Matt was Matt and his wife Nicole are on their honeymoon, and they're lying on a beach in Italy, and Nicole falls asleep, and when she wakes up, Matt's disappeared and she never sees him again. Okay. So Aoife thinks this is very interesting, so she picks her as her subject. So she's talking to this a year later. So she's talking to Nicole, and then in the middle of her investigation, Matt's body is found. So it turns into a murder investigation. And then Nicole then discovers that somehow her family life and Nicole's life have all got mixed up, and somebody is trying to kill them.
Wow. So she is, from book 1 to book 5, it's just like one thing after another then for her.
Well, I write a book a year, so there's 5 years between book 1 and book 5. Mm-hmm.
Wow. How does she handle like some of the emotional stuff that goes on with these stories?
Do you mean with her relationships?
Yeah, in relationships, just like how does she keep moving forward after, like, originally she finds her boss and then goes on and like has the husband issues. Like, how does she balance moving forward in the stories?
Well, she changes a lot from book 1 to book 5. So Aoife's backstory is that she was 18 when both her parents were killed in a car accident. Okay. And she got married shortly after that. And she kind of fell into a relationship with Matt because she was so young that not with Matt, I should have said, with her husband, whose name I've temporarily forgotten. But anyway, she fought Jason, that's his name. So she kind of falls into a relationship with Jason because at 18, most of her friends have no idea what she's going through. And they don't understand why she's not back to being herself like a month after her parents are dead. But Jason's backstory was that his father had walked out in the family when he was young, so he had some idea of what it was like to grieve for, a missing parent or whatever. So she finds herself drawn to him because he understands her. Mm-hmm. But around the time this book starts, she's kind of getting over what happened to her because it's been like 6 years now. So she's kind of getting over the trauma of what happened, and she begins to realize that as time goes on through the first book, she begins to realize that maybe she got herself into something she would have been better off staying out of, and that maybe she didn't marry him for the best reasons, and maybe he's not the best person. She's not the right person for her to be with.
The book's coming out, you're doing once a year. Does her story progress a year in between books as well? What is her storyline? Okay, it is.
Yeah. So she has a baby in book 1 and a 5-year-old in book 5.
Oh, that is so crazy. So you get to see not only her grow as a character, but the child too.
In the second book, Aoife's father-in-law's body is discovered 15 years after he died. Now, because Aoife lost her parents when she was 18, she became very close to her mother-in-law, and she saw her mother-in-law as a substitute mother. Now, that relationship was damaged during the first book, but she still feels quite responsible for her mother-in-law. So when her mother-in-law is the suspect for the husband's death, she decides that she has to try and solve it. So that's how come the second book came along. And again, I had no plans to write a third book or any plans to put Aoife in a third book. And then I was talking to a friend of mine about a murder that had happened in Ireland. So there was a man who murdered his family, his whole family. He murdered his wife and his kids and then himself. Would a normal person just go and do that? Yeah. And it occurred to me when I was having that conversation, it occurred to me, what if he didn't do it? What if somebody else killed the family and made it look like the husband had killed the family? And that was the plot for my third book. So then my next, again, I thought, at that stage now, I kind of thought I'd write a fourth book, but I had no plans. Yeah. So then after that, I was listening to the news one day, and they mentioned that 2 young men were walking along a cliff path, and one of the guys fell off. right? And they were saying, wasn't this a dreadful accident and all the rest? And because I write thrillers and think in terms of thrillers, I thought, well, if nobody was there, how did they know it was an accident? So, so I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't an accident. I'm sure it was, but it just gave me the idea for my next book. So my fifth book is that my fourth? My fourth book is about 4 people in their early 20s who are walking along the Cliffs of Moher, and that's like a very famous landmark in Ireland. And one of them falls off, and the friends that survived say that it was an accident, but a witness who saw the whole thing claims that one of the young men pushed his friend off the edge, and the other friends don't believe it. So Aoife gets involved then in trying to figure out what actually happened. So then I had 4 books written. So my fifth book, I was actually talking to my sister, and she mentioned a story that my mother had told. So my mother told a story about, I had told her, I never heard it, but she told her a story about someone she knew. We can't really remember what the connection was, but someone she knew who had gone on her honeymoon, like I mentioned in that book. She had gone on her honeymoon, and she was lying on the beach with her husband, and her husband disappeared and was never seen again. Now, presumably he drowned, but of course that's not what happened in my book. So that was my inspiration for all my books.
Wow, that's insane. But I love it. That's because it's real life events inspiring creativity. Ooh. So with you having a book coming out every year, what is your writing routine like?
I don't have one. I try to fit it in around my life, which usually means I start writing really late at night, and that is still far too late for writing.
I've got to run and grab something for him real quick. But while I do that, you guys take a look at her book while I'm doing this, because my son is being persistent today. Okay. There we go. Gave everybody a chance to read that synopsis, because it does sound like a very exciting series.
Yeah, well, actually, I've kind of abandoned that series for the moment. I may go back to it eventually, but I'm writing a completely different, a very mixed up book at the moment, because I'm writing a thriller that I'm writing about a time traveling detective.
Ooh.
So there's this woman who's Irish, and she's in Dublin in 2023, and she's young. She's 19. She's a college student, and she has, almost total freedom. And then she finds herself back in 1911, and she's married, and she has to a much older man, and she has 3 stepchildren. And of course, all the usual things are going on, and she has to find out what, and is she going to survive it, and all the rest.
Yeah. Oh, I love time travel novels. They're so fun. So with going into a different kind of type of story, is it giving your brain a little bit of a break from all the thrillers?
Well, I never write unless I can think of something to write about, and I just didn't think of something to write about for Aoife, but my mind was stuck on this of this idea of this woman who goes time traveling. So I mean, it's an awful lot more difficult because, first of all, I knew all the characters. I mean, I knew the main characters in Aoife's world, so I could write that without much thought. And I knew obviously the background because it's my world. But now I'm trying to figure out what England was like in 1910, which I don't know very much about.
And so this one's requiring probably more research than into the
A lot
background.
more. Yes.
Yeah, she goes back in time, and that's cool. So with you working on the new project, compared to how your writing was for the previous series, have you noticed any differences? Do ideas come easier for this one?
I suppose because I never plan, as I say. So usually I start off a book and I know who the murderer is. I know who the victim is. And usually I know why they did it. I don't always know why they did it, but usually I do. And that's all I know. Because I've been reading around this book for so long, I've got a lot of ideas and I know how it's going to end already.
Well, we are coming up on the end of our time here. So go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you and your books.
Okay. Well, my website is valcollinsbooks.com. Okay, so links to all my books are there. My books are also on Amazon. All of my ebooks are on Amazon, and you can also get my you can get the paperbacks anywhere really, in any major retailer there.
Her books again, guys. Check out all of those awesome covers. They've got some great storylines with more to come. And here is the most recent one once again, Dying to Tell. All right, Val. Well, thank you so much for